Funny women indeed. What's up, guys? I know you I forgot about Clueless, but how could I forget about Clueless? Um, I just figure when, with your class especially, it's alternating weeks. I feel like as soon as Friday hits for your online week, you guys immediately switch over to in person in your brains. It's like if I post anything, like a video on Friday, it'll just get lost in the shuffle. You'll never go back to see it. So that's why I do these the following online week, because now you're back to the online life. So hopefully it's effective. Let's talk about Clueless, you guys. Like, I your comments were really good. Like, I liked there was some point counterpoint stuff. Um, Callista and Ben and Maria sort of having a little discussion within the discussion, among others. And I just think, I don't know, I got a lot out of your comments. I have a bunch of stuff too, as per usual. So let me get through that stuff so this video is not 2 hours long. So Clueless, 1995, I think, like right in the thick of the 90s. And, yep. And, written, actually, it's an adapted screenplay. It's based on Jane Austen's Emma. So, that just gives it this other layer of context. Amy Heckerling wrote and directed the screenplay, and directed the actual movie. So it's very woman centric, from a creative standpoint as well, not just the story itself, which is meaningful. And the fact that it's a Jane Austen adaptation is, I think, again, gives it more depth than it has, and it's all framed in this sort of stereotypical high school setting, right? High school girl setting. So we have Cher, and a lot of you hit on this. Cher opens the movie, and you're like, oh, here we go again, right? And I haven't really talked about this as much in here as my other classes this semester, but it's this idea that most of the audience initially judges Cher right out the gate. Almost all of you said, at first I thought Cher was selfish and stuck up and, whatever, an airhead, all these kinds of things. But as the movie goes on, those things don't disappear, but they sort of fade behind the strength of her other characteristics, more noble or empowering characteristics. So I think with Cher, especially, Amy Heckerling in this case, is like, I'm not going to give you the woman that you expect, right? I'm not going to play into your prejudices and judgments and give you the woman that you're A, used to seeing, and B, that you expect. So I think that initial like, oh, here's another one of those movies, is was purposeful to be like, now I'm gonna mind fuck you, and I'm gonna spin it in a totally different direction. Um, so yeah, so I kind of have I'm all over the place with my comments, but we've been talking a little bit about these feminist battlegrounds, like what are women fighting for? There's a lot to fight for, and we talked a little bit last week about um, how the '90s seemed to want to take what happened in the '80s and commodify it, if you will, and shift the focus and convince young women, especially, that you know that your sexuality is where you become empowered exclusively, fucking and shopping, that whole thing. And I think it's interesting that Cher in this movie takes a very uh, different stance, right? Um, Cher places fucking, as I so eloquently wrote, way down on her list of things she can do to empower herself and others, right? So when the culture, I think, was starting to build this case of like, if you want to empower yourself and others, fuck a lot of dudes. Like when that was becoming prioritized by the culture, and I would argue largely male executives and uh, network goons, network owners, here's Cher saying, no, it's not. I would rather empower myself and other women through, you know, good deeds, through positivity, through, supporting each other. She's fighting this battle on other different battlegrounds than most were. And if you look at Sex in the City, and then we'll talk about these, like how much we've sort of strayed from the Cher aesthetic. A bunch of you mentioned connected this to like Legally Blonde and Mean Girls, which would come out, almost. I think Legally Blonde was 2001, Mean Girls was 2004. So you have 95, 01, 04. There are marked changes. And it has a lot to do with this transition of from second wave feminism to third wave feminism, and the stuff we talked about with 30 Rock on Friday with third wave feminism, and Tina Fey, who did Mean Girl. So you see how this is all sort of spinning together. And it was rare for the 90s to make that stand on sexuality as the only path to empowerment, right? Um, and here's another thing. I'm not saying that battleground isn't valid, the sexual battleground. I'm not saying that that's not valid, or that that battle needs to be fought, but there's no need to give it more attention than other equally sort of um, fertile battlegrounds, if that makes any sense. Um, and that's what Cher does. Cher does, puts it down here. It's not number one on her list. It's not number 1, 2, and 3 on her list before, you know, everything else. And that's huge. Just so you know, that's huge. um, I wrote down a bunch of things. Feminism doesn't have to be about rejecting aspects of life that are typically assigned to women, which is what a lot of people think. That if you are like Cher, right, and you're wealthy and you're white and you're, you know, you love to shop and clothes and all that kind of stuff, airhead, as some of you dubbed her, if you are those things, that doesn't, you know, you're not, that doesn't mean you're not a feminist or that you don't care about other women or women's issues or things like that. Um, when a lot of us love to assume those kinds of things, right? It doesn't have to be about rejecting aspects of life that are typically assigned to women. And that's often misconstrued in in the public in the public's definition of what it means to be a feminist. Um, and Sarah kind of made that point. I wrote Sarah Sarah next to that thought that I had because your comment kind of dovetailed right into that. So, um, who are we to judge what others draw power from? And this is as we get to third wave feminism, right? We're talking about Liz Lemon from 30 Rock in the way, in that episode that we watched, in the way that she was critical of how Abby like presented herself, right? And she was drawing power from this new identity for reasons that Liz had no idea about, right? But here, I, I just brought up the question, like, who are we to judge? I mean, everyone's different, and so who are we to judge what others draw power from? It's very easy for us to be like, and I don't think this was a feminist thing in 1995 as the movement was being shaped and manipulated by, various forces. Now it is. Now everybody judges. Well, you're not allowed, and even, tacitly in this class, like I generally downplay the sexual battleground as I refer to it. But who are we to judge if that truly gives women, if women truly draw power from it? We shouldn't do that. But the flip side of that is it's easy to trick yourself. And the media, entertainment media, is heavily invested in convincing you that that's what you believe. As it's getting really fucked up. But do you, yes, do women really draw power from that? Or have they been conditioned to believe that that whole thing? Um, but it, I think the question is valid. Um, who are we to judge what others draw power from? Um, I wrote this. I wrote this when I taught this last year. I remember saying I would kill for my daughter to be as unabashedly herself and give as few fucks as Cher does in this. It's it's impressive, right? And I think too few were supposed to have moved forward over the last 30 years or whatever. But I feel like girls, especially young women, have regressed in this way. Um, and Chloe talked about Cher's confidence in Cher's sort of, she is herself at all costs. She knows who she is, which is obstacle number one, being comfortable with and understanding who you are intimately. Um, and she doesn't care what you think of her in most cases. Like that, you know, I would, like I said, I would kill for my daughter to sort of be in that, um, in that frame of mind all the time. And that's a good thing. I said, I usually sometimes refer to Legally Blonde as Clueless 2, Electric Boogaloo. Um, it's almost like what yeah, Legally Blonde is Cher goes to college, right? And in Clueless, Cher wants to be a lawyer, and she's kind of, um, I think it's almost a natural progression there. And if you think about it, it marks this shift in feminism, the positivity of the relationships between Ty and Dion and Cher in Clueless, they start to change, right? Nobody who's there's no it's missing that outside threat, right? You think when Ty shows up, she's going to be seen as this threat, and they're going to, bitch each other out and all this stuff. You start to see it in Legally Blonde. Vivian's character clashes with Elle, right? Vivian and Elle compete with each other. They try to tear each other down. They clash with each other, and that is kind of one of the undercutting themes of third wave feminism is this finger pointing, like I'm the real feminist, you're not, you're doing it wrong, you're bad for women, like all those kinds of things. And you just it's not subtle, but it's it seems it's almost cute in Legally Blonde, but it grows, and by the time you get to Mean Girls, I mean it's literally Mean Girls, right? And the differences in those relationships and dynamics is an interesting sort of thread to pull at, I guess. And I wrote down all these like platitudes. Be yourself, whatever that might look like. Make your own choices, knowing that others may not make the same choices. They're not better or worse. They're just different, right? And different is interesting, like almost always. Um, that's kind of what Callista, I tied that in with Callista's string of comments about Cher. Um, different is interesting, right? And this goes to like their discussion of their sexuality and Cher's virginity, right? Like that. I mean, have you seen that kind of um, sentiment about a teenage girl's sexuality in a movie, like ever? Especially from the main character who you assume is fucking all the time, right? Who you've yes, like Cher's virginity in this movie is it's so important, and the way she doesn't hide behind it, she's not embarrassed about it. In fact, she's quite enlightened about it, right? One of the best jokes in the movie is about, you know, her being selective. She's like, think about how picky I am about shoes. And she's, those only go on my feet. Like, that's such a good joke. And it points to this idea that, you know, it's a way better sort of advocate for abstinence than saying, if you fuck, you'll go to hell. Like, that's never worked on anybody. But, right. So I think it's a practical, really interesting, empowered way to look at sexuality. Um, and for a female teenage character, but she doesn't judge Ty. She doesn't judge Dion for making different choices. They're different. They're not better or worse. Like, that's a huge thing for a teenager to start to understand. No one wants to be made to feel guilty for choices they make. And that's a lot of times what sober people do to people who choose to drink, right? It's like, oh, well, I'm better than you, and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's unnecessary. So, framing abstinence in a much better way than don't fuck, or if you fuck, you'll go to hell, basically. So I love that part of Cher's character, right? That's one of the most important parts, I think. Again, it's reclaiming that sexual battleground, right? She's clearly saying, like, I won't be defined by how many guys I have sex with. That's not. I choose to draw power from other things, right? So this, this is to most of you guys mentioned this idea, right? You think you know Cher, and she spends most of the movie proving to you that you don't know Cher. And that's think about that though. Like, Cher, she does run into jealousy and things like that, but she never lashes out or tries to hurt those who what does she do when she's jealous or whatever? She self-assesses, she looks inward, and she tries to make it right or fix it or deal with it in a much more productive way than to be like, well, fuck you, you know. She also, and again, this is counter to the momentum of the feminist movement in TV and film at the time. She rarely uses her sexuality to get what she wants. Right? I mean, that's a trope that we almost assume always existed. She uses her mind and people skills to manipulate people or get what she wants, right? She doesn't resort to her sexuality. And the whole thing with Elton, right? And he tries to push himself on her, and she stands up so much so as to get out of the car, just be like, fuck it, I'll deal with whatever's out there before I deal with you. I'll take that chance. So yeah, like, I think these are all kind of prophetic in many ways, and it's interesting to see what sort of came of that stuff. So, you get to Mean Girls, right? We're doing this Clueless, Legally Blonde, Mean Girls thing. By the time you get to Mean Girls, right, you have, if you compare Ty and Katie from Mean Girls, which is Brittany Murphy and Lindsay Lohan's characters, right? What do they represent? The new girl coming into this new world. And what happens? Like, look at the difference. Cher embraces Ty. Yeah, she tries to change her, but I think trying to change her is to, the reasons for doing that is to make her, yeah, happy, right? And empower her and give her, and eventually she realizes, like, oh, Ty's different than me. Like, I don't have to control everything that she does. Like, yeah, it's a negotiation, it's a relationship, you know. And what happens? They corrupt Katie, right? The Plastics, Regina George, yeah, and Gretchen and Karen, you know, it's, they're threatened by Katie. Like, Cher's not threatened by Ty. A little bit with the whole, um, a little bit, but you know what I'm saying. Mean Girls, it's, here comes a woman. She's immediately a threat. We have to manipulate her and we have to change her negatively. We have to turn her into one of us. It's a very different dynamic. And there's about 10 years in between. And it's really the, I think, the product of the movement from second wave to third wave feminism and the influence of this hypersexualized notion of feminism that is being, you know, foisted upon us. Is that a word? Foisted? I think it is. By primarily male, like I said, directors, executives, writers, whatever it is. Foist, impose an unwelcome or necessary person or thing on. Thank you very much. So, yeah, put those three movies together. You should watch them back to back to back. That's next, for the next time I teach this class. I'll have to do that. So Chase, I wrote Chase and Ashley. Your comments sort of blended right into that kind of discussion. Identity and agency, these were new kind of ideas in the mid 90s, brought on mostly by the Gen Xers like myself. You know, it isn't the things you do, it's who you are. Your identity isn't the things you do, it's who you are. Does that make sense? I don't know if it does. But to use an example, right, from the movie, shopping and drinking Diet Coke is not an identity. Those are things you do, right? But being loyal and selfless is an identity. So that's Cher to me. If you have to look at the person, you know, it's not the things you do, it's who you are, if that makes sense. Shopping and drinking Diet Coke is not your identity, but being loyal and selfless is. And I think that's Cher to me. Loyal and selfless would be two things that I would, two words I'd use to describe her. So, I mentioned a bunch of your comments and how they sort of cooperated with my own. Jess talks about the women in this movie don't attack each other. That, again, is back to the whole Mean Girls thing. Like, I just don't. Again, I think 1995, it was like feminism was up for grabs, if you will, in the media, at least. And Clueless weighed in, was like, let's go this way. But the powers that be, I think, like, that doesn't suit our needs as much as we'd like. So let's sort of stretch it and bend it and manipulate it into this other thing. Um, Kelly, I appreciated your honesty and saying that you still don't really love the movie, but you worked through that and saw its value. Um, I always like those stories, so thank you for that. Um, Talia, Talia brought up this distinction between being intelligent and being informed, which I think is an interesting paradox for sure. Like, and I think the point you were making was Cher is very intelligent but not super informed, which is better to be. Now, I guess to be both is the best, but um, not being informed, I think that was the point you were trying to make, was not being informed doesn't mean you're not intelligent, right? Like, it doesn't mean Cher's an airhead or dumb, right? Um, just because she doesn't know about things. I think that's where you were going with that. And then I'll leave you with Krista's idea. Krista's thought. Um, Caring about how you look doesn't automatically mean you don't care about anything else, right? That goes back to my original comment. Thank you very much. About how um, feminism doesn't have to be about rejecting aspects of life that are typically assigned to women, right? Which is that, caring about how you look and your appearance and your clothes and your makeup and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't exclude you from being a feminist or caring about anything other than yourself or how you look. So I thought that was a good place to finish this video. I'm going to give you guys a secret extra credit word to use in your response to this post. And that word is going to be what's the word going to be? Relish. Use the word relish in your post on this, in your comment on this post, and you will get extra credit goodies. So, relish.